So this is the second session, and it's on now that you've done your shelter training, here's what you don't know. Could we have the next slide, please? I'm Stephanie Charles. I'm the NCCR Regional Sheltering Lead, and I'm here today with my colleague, Matt Fryer, who is a shelter supervisor also in NCCR. Next slide. You've probably heard the saying, when you've seen one disaster, you've seen one disaster. The same goes for shelters. When you've seen one shelter, you've seen one shelter. We have good shelter training, but it's about a completely normal shelter. It's not about all the real world things that happen. And I frankly have never seen a completely normal shelter, and I've been doing this for 25 years. So today we're going to talk about some of the things that you might find yourself faced with in the real world. You're likely, if you haven't deployed before or haven't worked in a shelter before, to feel fairly unsure or overwhelmed at first. Just keep in mind that every single other person that you are working with in that shelter had a first job as well, and they felt the same way. This isn't something that we do in our day-to-day life. It's all different, and there are lots of things that are unfamiliar. So feeling unsure is fine. Just keep it in context. Everyone starts that way. You should also appreciate the importance of your role. You might be asked, for instance, to keep the eating area clean, when you could say, well, I could do that at home. Well, the difference between this and home, there are several. One, obviously, you're making the eating experience more pleasant for an entire shelter full of people, not just for your spouse and kids. A second is you're cutting down on the possibilities of disease transmission. But one of the most important things you're doing is you are being out and visible, and people can walk up to you. They may have a problem, they may have a question. They may be bored and just want to talk to somebody. They may want to ask if they can help you because they're bored. So you are doing a lot. Even though you could be cleaning your own kitchen at home, you're doing a lot by cleaning up the dining area in the shelter, because you are the person out there interacting with clients. And that's really one of the most important things you're going to do. The shelter supervisor or manager, the various supervisors, they're not out there as much interacting with the clients. If you're an SA and you're doing the work, you are the person the clients interact with most. And you're establishing the whole tone and tenor of the experience. If you are calm, if you're kind, if you're consistent and fair in all your dealings with clients, you are setting an atmosphere that is the best it can be under trying circumstances. So I just want to emphasize that if you are a new volunteer or you're an SA deploying as an SA, your role really, really matters. So why don't you take the next slide, Matt?
Okay. We talk a lot about the fundamental precepts in our training of sheltering. Two of them are everyone is welcome that's affected by the disaster, and another is that clients come first. Very important to get to know your clients when you're working in a shelter. As an SA, you're the person that's going to be around the most. Learn their names, greet them, talk to them, ask them how they're doing. That's going to change as the shelter experience goes on. Observe how they're behaving, especially ones you don't talk to who don't talk to you. Some clients are very private. You should honor that. I was just in a shelter a couple of months ago here in Oakland for a multifamily fire. We had a client who was a recent amputee and another one who had very serious health problems. We spent a lot of time with those clients. And there was a woman there who, when we asked her how she was doing, she would just say, I'm okay. I'm okay. She kept saying that until one day we realized when she came to us that she wasn't okay. She had been charging her phone on a battery and didn't have a phone charger. That was the first thing that triggered her to come forward. But she also had developmental issues and family trouble and all kinds of things. And we really scrambled to get her placed by the end of the shelter experience. So I guess the point there is that it's not enough to just go by what clients say. You have to actually get to know them. Eating with clients is also something that we did at that shelter, but in larger shelters, Red Cross folks tend to eat with Red Cross folks. Stephanie, I think you had something to say on eating with clients.
Yes, this is one of the things that I feel really strongly about. Imagine that you are a client in a shelter and you look over and all the Red Cross workers are clustered around a table. They're filling all the chairs. It's plain that clients aren't welcome there. Imagine a different experience where a Red Cross worker walks up to your table and you've got 3 spare chairs and they say, "Can I join you?" And they join in the conversation. You continue what you're talking about, and they listen and may chime in. They may share experiences they've had that relate to what's going on. It makes the difference in those 2 scenarios whether the Red Cross is perceived as snooty or friendly. And I think we want to be perceived as friendly. So eating with clients as opposed to clustering with all Red Cross workers segregating themselves is very, very important for the tenor of what's going on in that shelter.
And I'll take the last point. Being kind and observant does not mean fixing people's problems or getting deeply personal. I think the one reason that shelter workers don't mingle so much with clients is that the clients are going through a really stressful time. And I think it's natural to kind of pull back a little bit from those emotions and not want to get involved. But you can do this without taking on that person's problem. And it's very helpful for everyone to do that. All right. Diverse clients mean diverse needs. Um, First of all, you may have communication barriers, barriers of language. And we had a client in the same shelter I just spoke about who spoke American Sign Language. That's not a one-to-one translation between English, so having her write notes wasn't good enough. I won't cover all these because you're going to cover diversity in another training, but we'll just cover that service animals may conflict with people with allergies. Um, Cultural differences in space, noise, food, and privacy. Cultural differences can be a big issue in shelters. Non-traditional families and living situations. And we'll come back to fairness. So the best way to know how to support people with special needs is just to ask them. We can move cots so that people who have anxiety can have their back to a wall, and we can arrange the cots so that people with allergies are as far away from the service animals as we can get them. If you're separating cots by men, women, and families, ask the non-traditional family where they would like to be. And fairness is not the same as is not sameness. Think of how you'd feel if your pet had to go to the ASPCA because there was no co-located pet area at this shelter, and somebody else had a service animal that was right next to you in a cot at the dorm. You wouldn't feel that was very fair. Who do you think decides fairness? Can you put your answer in the chat? Anybody? Well, it's if you're a service associate, it's probably your supervisor that decides it. It may be the Red Cross. If it's a partner shelter, it may be the partner organization that gets to decide that. Do you have anything to add on that, Stephanie?
I don't see anything in the chat. Or were you
No.
asking my opinion?
Yeah. Oh, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, the cases where you have to treat people differently in order to be fair can be touchy. And so those are typically ones that are either an organizational policy or decisions made by somebody higher up. What is best for the overall shelter? That's we're balancing the needs of all those clients. So yes, so overall, we're trying to run the best possible shelter for all the clients. Service animals are a must. Yes, absolutely, Julia. Others are on the shelter agreement. In many cases, but there's always interesting new ways that you've got to balance these decisions. So just be aware of why a decision is made, the difference between a service animal and your pet, and be prepared to explain that to a client who asks. This looks like my slide.
Yeah.
So you will, especially as an SA, be assigned to do all kinds of things, and they may seem small. You know, you're restocking the canteen, you're cleaning anywhere and everywhere, whether it's doorknobs because there's a bug that's broken out, or the dining area, or just keeping the dorm orderly. You may be asked to reconcile SKYA, you know, take out people who've checked out or check them out in SKYA, or reconcile the records against what you're seeing in the dorm. These are all important. But it's also important to realize you're doing two other very important things at the very same time. You're out there in the dorm or in registration or wherever you are noticing or need to be noticing situations that may need attention. Could be something with the facility. If an extension cord has been run across a corridor by a client trying to get power over to where his or her cot is, that's a safety hazard, and you can take care of that yourself. But if the plumbing's overflowing, probably go tell your supervisor. You're going to have to get the facility janitor or whoever's caring for things in for that one. So you're paying attention to the facility, to clients. Are there clients who aren't eating? They're just picking up a little tiny bit of food and not really eating at meal times. Are there clients who seem sick? Are there clients who just lie in the cot all day, every day? You're paying attention to that. And what if you have a coworker who's generally pleasant, but today they're snappish and glum and they just seem like they've had it? A lot of these things you can help yourself. For your coworker, you can say, I can cover your station. Go take a break for a little while. You can talk to clients and ask them what the issue is, why they're not eating. Are they feeling sick and that's why they're staying in their cot? And get health services involved. You can deal with some of these and some you're going to need to escalate, but you are the eyes of the Red Cross in that shelter. And you're the one who's going to see a lot of things that the supervisors and manager may not see. You also are out there visibly being the Red Cross, and you may get interrupted endlessly. You likely will have lots of interruptions from clients who want information, who have problems, who just want to chat. And so you're doing three really important things: the task you are assigned to do, but paying attention and being there and being visible and responsive. And that tends to mean you may not finish everything you were sent to do. If that's going to be a problem, you don't want to surprise your supervisor with it. You want to give them a heads up that there's a lot going on today and you're having to deal with things. And so you're running behind on some of these things. Never surprise anybody is just a really good general principle of life. But these other things are really important. So your job is not just restocking, it's restocking and watching and being there and being responsive. Very important jobs, all of those. Let's see. We're back to you, Matt.
All right. Shelter work can be emotionally hard. People may be exhausted, embarrassed, scared, or angry. I was in a shelter in Santa Rosa a few years ago, 2020, 2021, and it was a small shelter in a hotel. I was the only person working in that shelter, and I remember clients were coming in. A woman came in who had dirt on her face. Her kids were dirty, and she had a dog. And I offered her a pizza, and she broke down and cried. That was the first time she said that day she'd stopped and hadn't had anything to eat. And I was the first one to talk to her, so that felt really good. You may be the first calm person they've seen today, and most frustration isn't personal. You're just a safe place where it lands. I had a client in Los Angeles who said, it's almost time for Saturday Night Live. If you don't find the remote and change the channel in 15 minutes, I'm going to tell your manager. He already said we could watch it. And so I did find the remote and change the channel, and she did watch it. But the point about the shelter being emotionally hard, as we talked about earlier, the clients are under a lot of stress. They're going through a disaster. It may be a fire, it may be an earthquake, but they're going through a disaster, and so they're stressed. They may have lost loved ones, they may have lost property, pets, all kinds of things can happen. So they're going through a very stressful time. They're stuck in an environment where it's just not ideal. We calculate that of the people displaced by an accident, 10 or 15% will show up at a shelter. That's because they'd rather go somewhere else. When the Oakland Hills fire happened in 1991, I lost my apartment and I couch surfed until I could find another place to live. The Red Cross helped me at that time, which is one of the reasons I became a volunteer. But it's a very stressful time, especially when you get to like the 2-week mark in a shelter. The only people that are in that shelter have to be there. They don't want to be there. People will trickle in that have run out of places to couch surf, but they're all stressed, and it's very difficult situation for them. But as we talked about earlier, you're kind of part of that too. You're kind of absorbing some of that emotional content, interacting with people, and it can be very hard on you and your coworkers. Not only is it 12 hours shift hard, but doing that kind of work for 12 hours can be really difficult. So, look out for each other, be kind to each other. As Stephanie just said, if you see somebody who needs a break and you can do it, offer them a break.
There have been a few comments in the chat, and then I'll take this slide. But before that, Daniel says that decisions in the shelter also depend on whether it's an evac shelter, is it ongoing, is it closing, what's going on here. And that's certainly very true. And Julia said there is always a lot of busy work, but clients come first. That's something to absorb. That is a basic. So listen to them. It helps you to determine their needs. And she also says, don't take it personally. I hadn't planned to tell this story, but we're not running short on time. So it can be very satisfying also to help somebody who's clearly stressed. I had one of the more memorable things that I've encountered in a shelter was at a fairground shelter, large shelter, 800 people or so. And I was eating breakfast and I looked over and there was a woman at the next table. She had some breakfast in front of her. She wasn't eating. She was just sitting there with tears running down her cheeks. She wasn't sobbing out loud. She was just sitting there with tears. And after I finished my breakfast, I walked over and I sat down beside her and I said, sounds like, or looks like you're having something of a rough day today. And the whole story came out, and it was a horrible story. She'd been diagnosed with breast cancer recently, and her husband had walked out, and then she'd lost her car in the fire or flood, I forget which it was. Eventually managed to get her kids to the shelter. She caught a cold at the shelter and she felt sick. And today was the day that she was supposed to start radiation treatment, and she didn't have any way to get there. Of all of those problems, the only two things I could help with was to take her to nursing to get her an over-the-counter med and to get her a bus pass. So we did those two things, and that helped. It really helped her. But I think more than that, just the fact that I sat there and I listened to this horrible story, what she'd been through in recent weeks. And in the end, I felt really good being able to help this woman who is just at a low point in her life. And help doesn't have to be something big. If it makes a difference to them, if it takes something of a load off, it can be very satisfying to you. So don't be afraid of dealing with emotionally hard situations. But when you're dealing with a situation that may be challenging, it's important to, yikes, never mind. We're having an emergency in Florida where I have family, but I didn't need to hear that right now. Greet somebody first. Establish the fact that you make eye contact and speak to them. That's part of treating somebody like a human being. And then discuss the situation, whatever it is, second. It may be something where you're having to enforce rules. It may be something where you see a problem and you're wondering how to deal with it. But you want to listen. Too many people don't listen. Listen for both the situation, the facts. Even if you're enforcing rules, you want to make sure you understand the real situation and why things are happening. And also listen for feelings and summarize the situation or what you've just heard so that the other person feels heard. And then if it's somebody who needs something, don't overpromise, but say, here's what I can do right now. I once got called to the lobby of a shelter. There was a client there and she was yelling at all the Red Cross people, very upset. And I walked in and I listened for a moment, and she was just saying all these different things. I was trying to figure out what the issue actually was. And after I listened for a couple of minutes, I said, hey, I'd like to talk to you, but can we go over to this room over there? It's got a couple chairs and we'll have some peace and quiet and we can sit down and talk this through. So she followed me over and we sat down and I pulled out a little spiral notebook that I always have on me in a shelter and a pen. And then I said, okay, so can you explain to me what the issue is? And she started yelling and ranting again. And I took notes until she got repetitive. And then I stopped her and I said, so I think I heard 5 issues. And she looked very startled. And I read off what I had heard her say from my notepad. And she said, yeah, I think that captures it. And we talked for a few minutes about what was water under the bridge, nothing to be done, what was something that we could address. And she got so calm and relaxed and cheerful and not ranting at all anymore. And as we went our separate ways, she said, you are the first person who ever wrote anything down. Everyone else just nodded and said, and forgot about me the moment they walked off. But just letting her know, it wasn't necessarily that I wrote it down, but letting someone know that you've heard them and you've really taken the effort to listen and understand the situation can turn things around entirely. If you have to enforce the rules, don't get angry. Just be very neutral about it. I had a shelter worker that threw a cot at another shelter worker. My temptation was to walk over and say, just what the hell are you thinking? That's generally not constructive. It's understandable, but much better to say, let's go outside. I want to understand what just happened. And they're probably going home at that point, but it's better to do it with neutral language than to say, what the hell were you thinking? If you see another volunteer getting stressed, we already mentioned this before, but check in with them, find out what's going on. I once made 2 people very happy. I had somebody working in the dorm who was just, it had it up to here with people, unhappy, frustrated people. And I had somebody out washing cots who hated being out all by himself. I swapped the 2 of them and they were both so happy. So you can deal with some of this sometimes. And if you find your patience is slipping, that's your cue to ask for a break or a role swap or something else. Working in shelters is stressful and it will get to you at some point or another. Just be aware of your own reactions to things and do something about it. Don't let it get too much. Was there anything, I forget if there was anything you wanted to add in here, Matt?
Just on that last point, that when I was down in Los Angeles, I was acting as a supervisor, but this applies to essays too. And we had a client, we had 5 dormitories down there, 2 infirmary wards and 3 dormitories. And we had a client who couldn't control her dog or her child and had been in all 5 of those dormitories. And every time, she had a problem and had to move, she would start off by questioning everything you said and basically arguing with you until she felt like she was going to get her way by wearing you down. And she worn me down in 4 dormitories and then was in the 5th and wanted some partitions to make an area for her dog and her child. And we didn't have partitions, and I said no. And I cautioned the people in the dormitory not to allow her to dominate all of your time. And I had lost my patience, and I realized that afterwards. I came back to that dormitory later, and I saw that some of the essays had made a barrier with extra chairs around her area, around her cots. And I thought that was really good. And I was pleased that they had done that. But I realized I myself had lost patience and was not going to be able to see that solution for her problem. So just something to keep in mind. All right. So when to reach out. So as an SA, you're not expected to know everything. As an SV, you're not expected to know everything either, but you're expected to make more decisions. Um, don't guess when you're an SA. Don't guess when you're an SV. Don't guess. More problems are caused by guessing wrong than are caused by asking for help. Um, Guessing undermines people's faith in your judgment at best, and it could have serious consequences if you do it in a bad situation. You have a chain of command. You can ask, first of all, a coworker. When you're in a shelter, you may be a brand new SA, but other people have been there as SAs multiple times. They may know the ropes better. You can definitely ask a coworker what they think. If they're not sure, you can always ask your supervisor. Now, your supervisor may be busy and hard to interrupt, but it's still a good idea to reach out to them if you can't decide what to do at your level. And then some situations you just have to escalate. We'll talk about those here on the next slide.
Okay. So we talked about observing safety concerns before, and some of them you can directly address and some of them you can't. If the toilet's overflowing, or if a door keeps repeatedly being propped open so that strangers, other homeless people in the case I'm thinking about, can slip into the dining area and steal food. And if the door keeps getting propped open, or somebody's putting something in the latch plate so it won't latch, and if you can't pay attention and you don't know who's doing it, there may be some other solution needed. And so that would be one to escalate. Any safety concern that you can't resolve should be escalated. Safety is very, very important. And we sometimes forget that, but we all have to be safe, the clients, the workforce, everyone. Complaints or situations if you're unsure how to proceed, especially if it is something that affects dignity or equitable treatment or trust. Matt, I think you had an example of this, didn't you? Or am I misremembering?
Yes, I did have a case where that happened. We had a case in Los Angeles where someone was going to the bathroom and the janitorial crew would come through and they just happened to push open the door on this gentleman and interrupt him while he was doing his business. And he came up to the front and complained about it. I took it to my supervisor who made an effort the next day to seek this man out and apologized to him personally. And we talked to the janitorial staff. That was a case where no one should have an expectation that they won't be safe in the bathroom. And it was just the janitors, doing their work really quickly and not paying attention. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So rumors, there are always rumors in shelters. Some rumors like the shelter's going to close on Friday. They may or may not be true, but once you've got a rumor out there of that sort, something that affects everyone, you want to make sure the shelter manager is aware of it. This doesn't happen as consistently as I would like to see, but there should be a daily meeting, typically around dinner time, with all of the clients. And one piece of that is dispelling rumors. There's a lot more to that, but to that meeting. But the shelter manager needs to know what's going on. What are the hot button issues so that they can address them in that meeting? Another thing about rumors is a lot of them aren't true. And this may not be something the shelter manager is going to speak about at all. But one time, Santa Rosa, the weirdest things have all happened to me in Santa Rosa. I was managing a shelter in Santa Rosa, and I walked in the door, and the person running registration said, "Stephanie, we just checked someone in, and then we found out he was a pedophile." And I said, "Oh, can you point him out to me?" And she pointed to who she was talking about over on a cot next to the wall. And I said, "And why do you say he's a pedophile?" And she said, "Well, he was asking where the kids were when he checked in, and then another client spotted an ankle bracelet and came and told us about it." And very long story short, I went over to the gentleman and I said, "Hey, could you come outside with me? I wanted to chat with you about something." And I told him basically, there's a rumor about this. And he pulls down both socks, pulls up his pants legs. There is no ankle bracelet. And I had already observed that where he had picked his cot was nowhere near the children. And he volunteered without my observing that he had asked where the children were because he wanted some peace and quiet. So I said, "Just forget this ever happened. I apologize. Rumors just spread, but I'm completely satisfied. Go back to your cot, and I will talk to the person who told me this was their rumor." And I went and I said, "There's nothing to this, and you might mention that to the one person who had reported the ankle bracelet, that he was mistaken." And even when something like that happens, you want to make sure your supervisor hears about it, because this may spread. But it's best to establish the facts right off the bat if you're hearing rumors of that sort. And then finally, we'll reiterate something that you did hear in your basic training. But if this happens typically at registration, but I've had it happen in the dorm when somebody just walked right by registration. If public officials, the mayor, the senator, somebody like that comes in, if law enforcement comes in, the media, people who are looking, who think that a friend or family may be in the shelter, or unaccompanied minors, all of those situations must get turned over or referred to your supervisor. And as I said, you've all heard that before, but it bears repeating. And let's see. Julia has a very important comment. If you're having a struggle with a coworker, please don't complain to another volunteer, because you make them feel like they're going to have to choose sides. Call someone at home and whine, complain, or cry so that you don't make it a toxic situation. Yeah, it's really good to have some outside place you can vent and not do it in the shelter, blowing up either at that coworker or at, telling somebody, "You would not believe what this guy I'm working with is doing." So excellent advice, Julia. Okay, our next, how to escalate. So I want to focus on an example here and ask you if you've got examples of such things. Your supervisor is busy, so it's important to be very brief, very succinct when you state the problem. They don't need to know the long history of who did what, blow by blow. Just give them a brief statement of the problem. It can be very helpful to suggest a solution. And I don't think Alan Unterkoffer is on this call, but I was the mass care chief, and he was a sheltering lead in a shelter one time. And after a while, I realized one of the things I really liked about working with him was how succinctly he stated the problems, and he always had a proposed solution, and it made my life trivial. And then, excuse me, at the end of the conversation, which is probably a brief one, it's a good idea just to summarize what you've heard to be sure that that it was really communicated. So I'll give a short example, but put in the chat if you've had things that you needed to do and if you have any tips on how to escalate. But I might, if I'm a shelter SA working in the dorm, I might go up to the dorm SV and say, "There's a family here who's really noisy. The mother has an infant and she goes off, finds a private area to breastfeed them. The other 4 children run absolutely wild, especially when she's off elsewhere breastfeeding, and I'm receiving complaints because they're really disrupting things. I was wondering if we should move that family into this other room that we'd reserved for overflow. Now, there might be reasons to do that, and there might be reasons not to do that. Your supervisor is going to decide if they're going to say yes or no. And if they say no, they're probably going to suggest an alternative. But at the end, say, okay, thank you. I will go let this family know what we're going to be doing, and I'll help them get situated or, in the other room, or maybe help get some partitions set up so they have privacy and can corral the kids or whatever. So doing it quickly, briefly, having a potential solution that you've thought about, and then making sure you have good communication with your supervisor are the keys to escalating in my experience. Now, I see Daniel saying always include supervisor in the process. Yes. If you think you need to escalate something, go to your supervisor. If the problem is your supervisor, this is a different matter, and we're not talking about that today, but keep your supervisor in the loop. They are going to make the decision or possibly escalate it further up the chain. Any other comments on what has made escalation work effectively, or alternatively, times when escalation just absolutely didn't work? And because this could be a bit of a story, if anyone wants to come off mute and give an example. That's certainly welcome too. Daniel also says count to 10. Yeah, that's true. Don't get mad. Any examples anyone has? I know there are people on here who have quite a bit of experience, and you've undoubtedly been in these situations. Okay, well, there will be a Q&A period at the end, and so if you think of something you want to share, you'll have that opportunity. So, Matt, back to you.
Okay, we've talked about some things happening in shelters that are a little tough to talk about, but what does success look like in a shelter? We always want clients and shelter workers to have the best experience they can. We hope the clients had a good shelter experience and that they were listened to and their needs were addressed. You can't solve people's problems. They're, as we talked about, coming in during a disaster, they have big problems, but that you listen to and address their needs during their sheltering experience. That's going to make people have a better experience. You're also providing an environment where people can share this disaster among themselves and with you. And that alone is going to make it a lot easier for them to get over this traumatic situation. You asked for help when you were unsure. You followed guidance instead of guessing. That's really true. You grew as an SA during your shelter experience. That should be always happening when you go out on deployments. You treated everyone with understanding, including yourself. As we talked about, you may not be perfect at that, but you tried to do it every time. That's a good goal. And even on a hard shift, success can look like doing your best and treating people well. These are all true things about it. Yeah.
Oh, and I will point out Zane Smith put in the chat, don't choke them. Yeah, don't choke your coworkers or the clients. It just is never the right thing to do. Daniel says you are providing them a home beyond shelter.
Yes.
Oh, you're saying, yeah.
You're providing them a home. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for preparing to become disaster shelter workers. The work is rewarding in so many ways. It can be difficult, but it's a very important job. And I think you'll be contributing a lot to other people and yourselves by taking it on.
Yep. And I second that. So
Okay.
you've got a very, very quiet audience. This is time to get louder. Anything on your mind that you'd like to talk about? Ask questions, give examples. You can come off mute and ask or put something in the chat. Julia.
I had a great experience when I went to Katrina. We were helping so many people, it was a world when you couldn't keep up with what was going on. Years later, I ended up in Hurricane Sandy, and I'm managing a shelter. And when the shelter workers came up to me, and she said, "You probably don't remember me, but you helped me when during Hurricane Katrina when I lost everything, and it made such an impact on me. I'm now a Red Cross volunteer."
Wow. That's a heartwarming moment.
Yeah, very much so.
And Matt, you said, I didn't know you never mentioned this beforehand, but you said you had an experience where the Red Cross helped you, and now you're a Red Cross volunteer, just like in Julia's case.
That was 1991, and many years went by before I joined the Red Cross. But as I did, I remembered that experience and how very helpful they were to me back in that difficult time. I didn't have to go to a shelter, which was great for me. But yeah, years later, I was sitting reading on something on my phone, and an ad popped up to drive blood for the Red Cross, and so I signed up to do that. And talked to a seasoned volunteer who said, really what the Red Cross does is sheltering. And I went out to Hurricane Isaiah, and we didn't actually set up a shelter, but then I went to the Santa Rosa, Santa Cruz fires and got hooked on sheltering at that point.
There's several things in the chat, and then I see Harriet has her hand up. In the chat, thanks for the real world examples, the experiences. The real world, you can't capture it in class. And Harriet talks about asking clients to help, cleaning, putting up cots, serving snacks. In Katrina, I was at the Astrodome, and this man walked up to me looking totally depressed, bright and early on a Sunday morning, and he said, every Sunday for many years, I've gone to the old folks' home and visited with them, and I'm at loose ends. Well, we had a senior section of the dorm, and I sent him over there, and I said, I am sure there are people who would love to have you go visit with him. So people like to help in different ways. Our shelters are a second home for a while for many. That's Scott. Make it enjoyable. Leslie, like the presentation. Albert, I haven't deployed in a sheltering role. Are there any practical differences between a client shelter and a staff shelter? Yeah, they're quite a bit different.
I'm not sure if you mean between a client shelter and a partner shelter, a Red Cross shelter and a partner shelter. But a client shelter is what we've been talking about, where clients are housed. A staff shelter is usually where the staff have their kind of sleeping area when they're not on shift. Is that correct, Stephanie, I believe?
Yeah, there's the staff shelter is a separate place, hopefully, if you can possibly do it, a separate facility from where the clients are, and you can get breakfast and dinner there usually, and it's a place to sleep and shower, hopefully, not always. But then there's the shelters run by partners. So, Albert, were you talking about a staff shelter in the sense of that's where the staff sleeps?
Yes, Stephanie. That's exactly where the staff sleep, as opposed to non-Red Cross managed shelter.
Okay.
And maybe a staff shelter is third party, not partner, but I don't know. I haven't deployed.
Well, I think it's usually a Red Cross shelter for the staff. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It tends to be a lot quieter because people are only there for sleeping. You do have to have sleeping quarters for night shift during the day. So you're going to have two separate sleeping quarters because you'll have, quite a few people, not quite as many people in night shift as day shift, but it's quiet. You're only serving 2 meals in my experience. Of course, I'm never there at lunchtime. Red Cross workers, they can get testy. They can occasionally get into it, but I would say Red Cross workers are much more familiar with sheltering and all the things that go with it, and they're much more likely to go take a walk if they're feeling stressed than to get in it with another volunteer. So they're actually quite different in my experience. And of course, we like to put people up in hotels, but that comes and goes. Harriet, your hand is down, but you did have it up. Was there something you wanted to say?
Yes, on the good side, I was responding to a DAT call here in Houston, and a woman said, "Oh, I like the Red Cross because you helped me so much after Katrina." And I'm thinking, oh dear, maybe she's going to try and get everything that she got at Katrina, the federal aid, from us little Houston. It's not going to work. So I talked to her and said, "What is it you need?" She said, "Well, I do need a bit of help, but I wanted to tell you that when we got to Houston, the Red Cross helped me and my children, and they helped me find work. And my family, my mother had never worked, my grandmother had never worked, and my great-grandmother had never worked. But we came to Houston, and I now have a job, and I'm so proud, and it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Red Cross."
Wow.
So
Yeah.
yes,
There are
some
wonderful,
good
heartwarming
stories.
stories of, I mean, we've heard several here. This is part of why I really like shelter work. The other part is it's problem solving. It's really interesting in my experience, but the rewards from people who've been helped and who take the time to come thank you, and all the hugs and things like that. It's really heartwarming. I see we also have, let's see, Daniel says, Daniel has an interest in evac shelters, given that he's had to open one 6 times in the last year. I will mention that to the organizers. That's a good point. Julia says staff are more demanding. We are spoiled. Okay, she's got a different perspective here. I thought we were more tolerant, but she's all obviously had some different experiences. And Al just acknowledges the answer. Anyone else with either questions or comments? Anything to share? Okay, well then we may be over. We wrapped up a little bit early.
Julia's
We
got-
weren't sure. Oh, Julia, yes.
I just wanted to answer Daniel's question. It depends upon where you're at on evac shelters, because in Hawaii, they tell the clients there that they have to bring their own food and bedding for the first 3 to 5 days. Then if it becomes a true shelter, then Red Cross will support past that. Otherwise, you just show up and you hang out there until the storm passes. So it is a little bit different in different areas on what an evac shelter looks like. So yeah, that's a good idea that we learn more about what an evac center is.
Yeah, good point. Florida also is a little bit different. I have family in Florida on the coast, and they have never evacuated to a Red Cross shelter, but I was appalled the first time they said, "Oh, there's no furniture, there's no beds, there's no nothing. We just go and bring an air mattress or something, so we've got a place to be while the storm passes." And I said, "That's not a Red Cross shelter," but I was wrong. Carol, they were a little bit different there. Carol, you've got your hand up.
So with 2 things on the evac shelters, yes, in Florida, just think of the fact that they may evacuate the whole coast. 90% of those people will go home as soon as the hurricane passes. So if you are going pre-hurricane and you're doing sheltering, make sure you bring stuff for yourself to take care of that. You have some protein bars and stuff, because you may be put in them, because we're not setting up a cot for 10,000 people who are only going to be there for 4 hours. The storm passes and then they all go home. They'll switch it to a regular shelter for those who can't go home afterwards. And as far as staff shelters, I agree with Julia. 99% of the clients I consider the staff my clients, are wonderful. But if you're in a staff shelter, don't throw at the staff. They're Red Cross staff. They're volunteers like you, that you're privileged and that you break the rules for that. When you're in a staff shelter, follow what the shelter team that's working the shelter tells you. You're not and stuff. Don't make a horrible experience for the people that are trying to help you. As I said, 99% of everybody is wonderful, but that 1% that gets demanding can just make it horrible. And I always tell my volunteers, plan on when you deploy that you're going to be in a staff shelter. Be happy when you get a hotel. Red Cross will do everything they can to get you a hotel, but it's the people that get there and they get mad because they're sleeping on a cot, and then they make it miserable for everybody else. And we want to support each other and care for each other and not make it harder on our fellow workers.
Okay. Well, maybe I've been lucky not having to run into this, but with Carol and Julia both saying that the Red Cross staff can be problematic, the 1%, stand warned. The other thing I would say is having a protein bar or something else, or some protein bars or some other kind of emergency food is just always great because things are unpredictable. You cannot count on food. 2% at a staff shelter. Okay, Scott, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess one comment I have is, possibly, those 1 to 2%, I mean, they've been doing, they didn't get their 7th day off, and they're worn out. They're worn out, and things go kind of haywire, and you lose it, and you just have to go. I need to take a walk.
Yep.
I need to take a walk, and tell our fellow volunteers, are you doing okay? Let's take a walk, or go take some time off.
Mm-hmm.
That's well said.
Yes. And Matt, I've been dominating this, but feel free to hop in. And as you know, I'm going to have to hop off in 2 minutes. I'm going to next thing, but Julia's got her hand back up.
I know I'm probably contrary to what everybody else believes, but I like staff shelters because when you're in a hotel, you're locking yourself in a room by yourself, and sometimes you need that downtime. But in a staff shelter, you get to engage with other volunteers in other gaps. You can sit around and play cards and laugh and enjoy each other's company. So yes, you're snoring next to 200 of your new closest friends, but it's a team bonding and opportunity to really get to know other volunteers. And so don't take it all as a negative thing. Try it and find out some are really good and you can actually enjoy it. I've celebrated Thanksgiving and Christmas and my birthday in staff shelters and enjoyed it every time.
Wow.
And I'd like to follow up with my original statement about evac shelters. These 6 that I've opened up generally has been arriving either via DAT or getting that phone call at 2 a.m. where, you're the little guy with his hole plugging the dike and hoping the cavalry shows up within an agreeable amount of time. That really, for us in the Pacific, especially on the islands, it requires a lot more effort in managing those kinds of situations than we've been getting. Whether we're going to keep paperless, whether we're going to try and manage a large ongoing wet population coming in at 2 a.m. Those require special kinds of skill sets and awareness about what your priorities are. What you've been talking about have been places that have the availability of cots and support material readily available. And I think we need to spend more time with these real life situations for us in the islands.
Yeah,
The fact you're talking about islands is really important. I'm going to bow out, but I'm leaving you in Matt's capable hands to continue the conversation for the next few minutes. But thank you all for being here. And that doesn't mean we're ending. It just means I'm going to another meeting. And thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Stephanie.